Let me guess how your last garden ended. You bought a few pots in spring, filled them with hope and potting mix, and for about 2 weeks, it looked like you were finally doing it. Then life happened. You went away for a long weekend. You forgot to water on the hottest day of July. You watered too much the following week to make up for it. And one evening you walked out onto the patio, and there it was, a row of brown, crispy, collapsed little plants staring back at you like they were personally disappointed. And you told yourself the thing that almost everyone in your shoes tells themselves. Some people just aren't meant to grow things. You have the wrong hands. Your mother had the green thumb, and it skipped right over you. You look at the neighbor's tumbling tomatoes, and you decide, gardening is one of those talents you were simply born without. I want you to put that idea down right now, because it is not true. Those plants did not die because of your hands. They died because nobody ever told you that some vegetables are needy, dramatic little divas, and some vegetables genuinely do not care what you do to them. You were handed the divas. You were handed the crops that faint if the light shifts and sulk if you forget them for a day. Of course you struggled. You were playing the game on hard mode, and you did not even know there was an easy mode. So here is the promise for the next 45 minutes. I am going to walk you through 15 vegetables that are almost impossible to kill in a container. Not 15 vegetables that will grudgingly survive if you baby them. 15 crops that will forgive the missed watering, surprise heat wave, the week you went to visit the grandkids, the overwatering, the underwatering, the wrong-sized pot, and the general chaos of a real human life. These are the plants that grow themselves. And if you are over 50, or working with a small balcony, or a single sunny windowsill, or you have simply lost every gardening battle you have ever fought, this is the list that changes things. Not because you are going to become a better gardener. Because you are finally going to be handed the right crops. Let me show you the first one, and it happens to be the toughest green you will ever grow. Kale. I know. Somewhere in the last decade, kale got turned into a smoothie and a personality, and everyone got a little tired of hearing about it. But forget all that for a second, because underneath the hype, kale is quietly one of the most forgiving vegetables you can put in a pot. The people at Epic Gardening flat out call it the toughest, most forgiving crop and the easiest vegetable to grow, and once you have actually grown it, you understand why they say that. Kale is perfect for a forgetful gardener because it is not trying to race to the finish line. A tomato is desperate to fruit before frost, so it panics if you slip up. Kale is a slow, steady leaf machine. You are not waiting for one big harvest. You are picking a few outer leaves at a time, and the plant just keeps making more from the center. According to Epic Gardening, a single plant can keep giving you leaves for 4 to 6 months if you keep picking the outer ones. That means one pot, one plant, half a year of dinners. And every leaf you take, it replaces. Now let me tell you about the specific kind of neglect kale survives, because this is where it really earns its spot. Cold does not scare kale. Not even a little. The Old Farmer's Almanac notes that mature kale can shrug off temperatures well below freezing, down into the low teens Fahrenheit for hardy types. While your neighbor is dragging blankets out to cover their tender plants on the first frosty night, your kale is sitting outside in the cold, unbothered, and quietly getting better. And I mean that literally. Kale tastes sweeter after a frost, and this is one of my favorite little pieces of garden magic. When the temperature drops, the plant starts converting the starch stored in its leaves into sugar. That sugar acts like antifreeze inside the cells, lowering the freezing point so the leaves do not turn to mush. Think of it the way salt on an icy driveway keeps water from freezing. The plant is protecting itself, and the delicious side effect, as the folks at Epic Gardening describe it, is that the bitterness fades and the sweetness comes up. So the very cold snap that kills your fussy plants is the thing that makes your kale taste like candy. You did nothing. You just let it sit there in the cold, and it rewarded you for the neglect. But what about the other direction? What about heat and drought, and the weeks you forget the watering can entirely? Kale is a cool weather crop at heart, and I will be honest with you, in the dead of a brutal summer it can get stressed and want to bolt, which means it sends up a flower stalk and the leaves turn bitter. Harvest to Table has good notes on beating that heat stress. But a container gives you a trick that the ground never will, and it is the reason pots are your secret weapon in this whole video. A container has legs. Or rather, it can. When the afternoon sun turns your patio into a frying pan, you slide the pot 4 feet over into the shade of a wall or a bigger plant. You cannot pick up a garden bed and move it. You can absolutely pick up a pot. So kale that would struggle in the ground stays comfortable in a container, because you get to change its address whenever the weather turns mean. Let me give you the container tip so you can actually do this at home. Kale is not fussy about its pot, but give it a little room to be its tough self. A container that holds around 3 to 5 gallons, roughly the size of a big bucket with at least 1 plant per pot, is plenty. Make sure there are drainage holes in the bottom. Soggy, waterlogged soil where the roots suffocate and rot is what genuinely takes kale down, so those holes are doing the real work. If your pot has holes and your soil is not swampy, you have removed about 90% of the ways a plant can die. And the pot has one more gift for the forgetful. When frost gets truly severe, or you want to stretch the season, you just carry the whole thing closer to the house, tuck it against a warm wall, or bring it into a garage overnight. Your kale does not know it is winter. It thinks it is having a lovely mild autumn, and it keeps feeding you. So picture what actually happens in real life. You plant kale in a pot in early autumn. You forget it for a week, and it is fine. A cold snap comes through that flattens everything else on the block, and your kale gets sweeter. Summer heat rolls in months later, and it starts to look tired, so you drag the pot into the shade and it perks right back up. That is not a plant you are keeping alive. That is a plant that is keeping itself alive and handing you dinner while it does. This is what I mean when I say you were given the wrong crops. Nobody who plants kale in a pot walks around calling themselves a plant killer. It simply does not let you. Now let me hand you the second one, and this one might be even prettier than it is tough. Swiss chard. If you have never grown it, picture kale's flashier cousin. Chard grows in big, glossy, ruffled leaves, but the stems, oh the stems! There is a variety called bright lights, and another sold as rainbow chard, where the stalks come up in neon yellow, hot pink, deep red, sometimes an orange or a white one just to surprise you. The Royal Horticultural Society actually recommends it as a container idea specifically, because it looks that good on a patio or balcony. So this is a vegetable that earns its space twice over. It feeds you, and it looks like you planted flowers. On a small balcony where every pot has to justify itself, that matters. But we are not here for looks, we are here for toughness, and chard delivers. Harvest to Table calls it one of the easiest vegetables you can grow in a container, and this is the phrase that made me love it. It tolerates, and I am quoting the gardeners who grow it, negligence on your part. That is written down as a feature. A vegetable whose official selling point is that it puts up with you forgetting about it. That is exactly the crop a forgetful gardener needs. The specific neglect chard survives is the big one that gets most people. Dry spells. The mist watering. The heat wave while you are away. Once Swiss chard is established, which just means it has been growing a few weeks and settled its roots in, it becomes genuinely drought tolerant. The Old Farmer's Almanac and the growers at Harvest to Table both note that established chard shrugs off dry stretches that would wilt a lettuce into oblivion. Now chard will make more leaves faster if you water it regularly. I am not going to pretend otherwise. But the difference between chard and a fussier green is what happens when you fail. A tender lettuce that dries out is done, gone compost. A chard plant that dries out droops, looks sad and dramatic, and then you finally remember it, give it a good drink, and by the next morning it has stood right back up like nothing happened. It forgives you. It does not hold a grudge, and it does not die of one missed day. And it does not stop at drought. Chard is frost hardy too, so it holds through the cold shoulder seasons on both ends of the year, spring and autumn, when a lot of crops would quit. It tolerates poor soil without complaint, and it does not even mind being a little crowded in the pot. This is a plant that was built to be low maintenance from the ground up. The container tip for chard is a beginner's dream because it barely asks for anything. Chard has shallow roots, so you do not need some deep, expensive planter. Gardener's Path and Harvest to Table both point out that a pot around 8 to 12 inches deep is plenty for full-sized plants, and if you are happy harvesting smaller baby leaves, you can go shallower still. You can genuinely grow a chard plant in a container as small as a single gallon. Think about that. A pot that small, sitting on a windowsill or the corner of a balcony, giving you fresh greens for months. Give it a spot that gets some decent light. Keep the soil from going bone dry for weeks on end, and that is close to the whole job. And now the best part, the part that makes chard feel like it is cheating on your behalf. It is a cut and come again crop, which is the single most forgiving way a vegetable can grow. You do not harvest the whole plant and start over. You just take the outer older leaves whenever you want a handful for dinner, snapping or cutting them off near the base and leaving the little inner leaves alone. And the plant keeps growing right out of the center. Harvest to Table describes it perfectly. If you leave an inch or so of the plant standing and only take the outer leaves, chard will hand you a continual harvest all season long. One planting in one pot gives you months of greens, so you are not replanting and you are not restarting. You are just wandering out with scissors whenever you feel like it and coming back with dinner. So let me put the two of these together, because I want you to feel what just happened. You started this video believing you kill plants. And in the space of a few minutes, I have handed you two vegetables that do not let you kill them. Kale, that gets sweeter the colder it gets and feeds you for half a year from a single pot. Chard, whose actual reputation among gardeners is that it survives your negligence, stands back up after a dry spell, and keeps regrowing from the middle no matter how many leaves you take. Neither of these is a plant you have to fuss over. Neither of these punishes you for having a life. If you planted nothing else this year but these two, in two pots, on one sunny corner, you would have fresh greens for dinner from spring straight through the frost, and you would barely have to think about them. That is the whole shift I want you to make. Not you becoming more careful. The crop's becoming more forgiving. You have been blaming your hands this whole time when you should have been blaming the plant list. And it gets even better, because kale and chard still ask you for one small thing. They ask you to at least remember they exist and put them in a pot. But the next handful of crops on this list barely ask you for that. I am talking about vegetables that regrow from the scraps you were about to throw in the bin. Vegetables that sprout so fast you can harvest them in a couple of weeks, before you have had time to overthink them or mess them up. Some of them practically plant themselves and come back next year without your permission. If kale and chard are the forgiving ones, the next four are the ones that genuinely feel like they water themselves. Let me show you the vegetables that grow whether you help them or not. Green onions. And I want to start with these because they are the vegetable that finally proves the point I have been making. You do not even need a seed packet. You do not need a trip to the garden center. You need the thing you are about to throw in the bin. Here is what I mean. The next time you buy a bunch of green onions at the grocery store, use the green tops for your cooking like you always do, but stop before you toss the little white root ends. Those pale bottoms with the stringy roots hanging off them are not trash. They are a plant. Stand them up in a small glass of water, roots down, on a windowsill where they get some light, and then walk away and live your life. That is the entire setup. A glass of water and a window, and you have already done the hard part just by buying groceries. The folks at Food Network describe standing the white ends in a jar of water and watching them regrow, and they are not exaggerating about the speed. Within the first day, you will already see new green pushing up from the top. You can have fresh new green onions ready to snip within about 5 days, and the stalks reach close to full size in a week and a half. 5 days. Think about how many things in your life take longer than 5 days and give you nothing. Your green onions will have regrown themselves before your next grocery run. Now let me tell you the one small piece of maintenance, and it is genuinely the only thing this plant asks of you. The water gets cloudy after a few days. When it starts to look murky, you pour it out and add fresh tap water. Hungry Hui suggests changing it every couple of days, and that is the whole job. Dump it, refill it, and you are done. You are not fertilizing, you are not measuring anything. You are not worrying about drainage holes or soil. You are pouring out old water and pouring in new, which is roughly the same difficulty as watering a houseplant you already ignore. The specific neglect green onions survive is the neglect of somebody who does not think of themselves as a gardener at all. You can forget to change the water for longer than you should, and they keep going. You can cut them all the way down for a recipe, and they grow right back from the same white base, again and again. Masterclass notes you can regrow them in a glass of water or move them into a little pot of soil, and either way they keep coming. This is a plant that regenerates from its own scraps, on your windowsill, while you forget it exists between dinners. If a green onion in a cup of water can die on you, I would genuinely be impressed. And I want you to feel the psychology of this one, because it matters more than the onion itself. Every gardener I have ever met who thought they had no talent needed one early, easy, undeniable win. They needed to grow one single thing and watch it work, so their brain would finally stop screaming that they kill everything. Green onions in a glass are that win. 5 days from now you could be standing at your own kitchen sink, snipping fresh green onion over your eggs, from a plant you regrew for free out of garbage. That is the moment the story you tell about yourself starts to change. Not when you grow a prize tomato. When you realize the scraps in your hand were alive the whole time and just needed a cup of water. So keep a little glass going on the sill. It costs nothing, it feeds you, and it quietly reminds you every single morning that you are not in fact a plant killer. Now let me hand you the next one, and this one is going to fill your salad bowl faster than you would believe. Leaf lettuce. And I want to be specific about the word leaf here, because it changes everything. There is the kind of lettuce that grows into a tight, dense head, like an iceberg or a romaine heart, and that kind is a little fussier and takes its sweet time. And then there is loose leaf lettuce, the roughly open kind that never bothers forming a head, and that is the one we want. Loose leaf lettuce is one of the most forgiving vegetables you can put in a container, and the reason comes down to what is happening underground. Lettuce has shallow roots. It is not sending a long taproot, digging down looking for water and anchorage the way a big thirsty plant does. It sits near the surface, spreads out a little, and stays close to home. The Old Farmer's Almanac points out that this shallow-rooted, fast-maturing habit is exactly what makes lettuce so well-suited to pots, window boxes, and planters. You do not need a deep, heavy, expensive container. You barely need depth at all. Gardener's Path recommends about 6 inches of depth for the loose leaf types, and that is it. A window box on a railing. A shallow trough on a balcony. Even, and I love this detail, an old colander with the holes already built in for drainage. If it holds a few inches of potting mix and it can drain, you can grow lettuce in it. That shallow root is a gift for a small space gardener, but I will be honest with you about the trade-off, because a shallow root is also a shallow water reserve. This is the one place lettuce asks for a little attention. A big deep-rooted plant can ride out a dry spell because it has a whole column of soil to pull from. Lettuce does not. So in the heat of summer you do want to check it more often, sometimes daily, because a small pot near the surface dries out faster than a big one. But it still earns the word forgiving, and for the same reason chard does. When lettuce gets thirsty it wilts, it flops, it looks dramatic and sad. And when you notice and give it a drink, loose leaf lettuce usually perks right back up. It is telling you clearly what it needs, in a language you cannot miss, and it gives you a second chance when you finally listen. The container tip that makes lettuce nearly foolproof is to think of it like a windowsill herb rather than a proper crop. Give it a spot that gets some sun but not the brutal, full-power blast of midday. In fact, the Old Farmer's Almanac and Gardener's Path both note that a little afternoon shade actually helps lettuce, which is wonderful news, because it means the shady balcony or the east-facing windowsill that would starve a tomato is genuinely a good home for your salad greens. And harvest it the cut-and-come-again way, the same forgiving trick that makes chard so generous. You do not pull up the whole plant. You snip the outer leaves for tonight's salad, and leave the little center growing, and it hands you more within days. One shallow window box of loose leaf lettuce can feed you salads for weeks from a single sowing. And it is fast. Within about 3 weeks of planting, depending on the variety, you can already be pinching off leaves for dinner. 3 weeks from seed to salad. In a container you could balance on a windowsill. That is not a plant you have to be good at. That is a plant that makes you look good. Now I promised you honesty in this video, so let me give you the honest limit on lettuce, and it is a real one. Lettuce is a cool weather crop. It loves spring and it loves autumn, and it does not love the deep heat of high summer. When the temperature climbs and the days get long, lettuce does something called bolting. It gives up on making tender leaves, sends up a tall flower stalk instead, and the leaves it does make turn bitter as a way of protecting itself. This is not you failing. This is just the plant reading the calendar and deciding its season is over. So the honest truth is that lettuce is a spring and fall crop for most of us, not a July crop. And you know what? That is completely fine. You lean into it. You grow your salad bowl in the mild months when it wants to grow. And in the hot middle of summer, you let it rest and you grow the heat lovers instead. Working with a plant's natural timing is not a limitation. It is the whole secret. Nobody calls themselves a plant killer for letting lettuce finish when lettuce wants to finish. So picture your railing. A window box of loose leaf lettuce, 6 inches deep, sitting in gentle morning light, feeding you salads from spring into early summer with nothing more than regular water and a pair of scissors. When the heat comes, you thank it and move on. That is a crop that fits around your life instead of fighting it. Now let me give you the third one, and this is the crop for the impatient among us, the one that is ready before you have had time to overthink it. Radish. If green onions are the free win and lettuce is the fast win, radishes are the win for anyone who does not trust themselves to keep a plant alive for very long. The secret with radishes is speed. They are ready so quickly that there is barely any window in which to mess them up. Gardener's Path calls them one of the best starting points for a beginner, precisely because they are forgiving, fast, and do not need fertilizer or trellising or any complicated maintenance. You put the seed in the soil, and in about 3 weeks to a month, sometimes as fast as 3 weeks flat, you are pulling up a crisp little radish. Some varieties are ready in around 25 days. The seeds themselves sprout within a week. So the entire lifespan of this plant, from the day you plant it to the day you eat it, is shorter than a month. There is simply not enough time for a forgetful gardener to do enough damage. Let me tell you why that speed is such a gift for confidence. Half the reason people kill plants is that the plant sits there for months, silent, asking to be kept alive through every heat wave and vacation and busy week, and eventually one of those weeks catches you. Radishes do not give you the chance to fail. You plant them, you blink, and they are done. It is almost impossible to overthink a plant that finishes before you have finished worrying about it. The container tip for radishes is refreshingly simple, and it is one of the easier crops to get right. Because you are eating the root, the little bulb that swells up underground, you just need a pot with enough depth for that root to form. Gardener's Path suggests at least 6 inches of depth for the round globe varieties, and a bit more, around 10 inches, for the longer oblong kinds. A pot, a window box, all of it works. Gardening know-how points out that their compact size and easy care make them a breeze in pots and planters. And the one rule that actually matters, the same rule we keep coming back to, is drainage. Radishes like their soil lightly moist, but they will rot in soggy, waterlogged pots, so you want holes in the bottom so the water can escape. Holes in the pot, seed in the soil, a sunny spot, and that is genuinely the whole recipe. The specific neglect radishes survive is impatience and inattention, which happen to be the two things forgetful gardeners have in abundance. You do not need to feed them. Gardener's Path notes they do not require fertilizer, which means one less thing to remember, one less thing to buy, one less thing to get wrong. They germinate fast and reliably in cool spring and fall soil, so you get a high strike rate on your seeds without babying them. And because the whole cycle is so short, a missed watering here or there in that brief window rarely spells doom the way it would for a slow crop. You are asking this plant to survive for a few weeks, not a few seasons, and it is more than up to that. The main thing to know is that, like lettuce, radishes are happiest in the cooler shoulder seasons, so spring and autumn are their moments to shine, not the peak of summer. And there is a quiet joy in radishes that I want you to have. Pulling one up. There is nothing quite like reaching into a pot and lifting out a plump red root that you grew from a tiny seed in less than a month, on a balcony, with almost no effort. For someone who has spent years believing they cannot grow anything, that small tug of a radish coming free of the soil is worth more than the radish. It is proof held right there in your hand. Now let me give you the fourth crop in this group, and this one might be the closest thing to a plant that literally refuses to leave. Arugula. If you have only ever met arugula in a fancy salad or on a pizza, tossed on peppery and green at the last second, let me reintroduce you to it as a plant, because as a plant it is almost aggressively easy. Arugula, also called rocket, is fast even by the standards of this fast group. The Old Farmer's Almanac notes you can begin harvesting when the outer leaves reach 3 or 4 inches long, and in cool spring weather that can be as little as 20 days after you sow the seed, sometimes faster in a warm spring. The seeds sprout within about a week. So you are back in that beautiful territory where the plant is done before you have had a chance to fail it, feeding you peppery greens in under 3 weeks. The container tip for arugula is the same low bar as its cousins in this section. It has a modest root, so a pot at least 6 inches deep with good drainage is plenty. And Harvest to Table recommends loose, fertile soil and a container that will not let water pool at the bottom. The one habit worth building, if you want a steady supply, is to sow a fresh little pinch of seed every couple of weeks. That way, as one batch gets tired, the next is coming up right behind it, and you are never without a handful of greens. But even that is optional. You can plant it once, harvest the outer leaves cut and comb again style, and it will keep offering you more for a good while. Now for the trait that makes arugula almost impossible to lose forever, and it is the whole reason it earns its spot on a forgetful gardener's list. If you let it go, it plants itself. Arugula is what growers call a self-seeder. If you get busy and stop harvesting, or you simply decide to let one plant do its thing, it will send up little white flowers and then form seed pods, each one packed with seeds, and those seeds drop into the pot and the soil below and come up again on their own. The Old Farmer's Almanac notes that arugula readily self-seeds in many regions. So the very neglect that would end most crops, walking away and letting it flower, is the exact thing that hands you next year's arugula for free. You did not plant it. It planted itself using your forgetfulness as the plan. And I owe you the same honesty I gave you on lettuce, because arugula shares the same limit. It is a cool season green, happiest in the mild 50s to 70s Fahrenheit, and when real heat and long summer days arrive, it bolts. It shoots up a flower stalk, the leaves turn sharper and more bitter, and it decides its salad days are over. Harvest to Table notes that full sun plus real heat means guaranteed bolting, and that a little afternoon shade helps you stretch the season in warm weather. So like lettuce, arugula is your friend in spring and autumn, and in the hot heart of summer you either give it some shade or you let it bolt on purpose and self-seed for next time. That bolting is not a failure. For arugula, it is literally how it replants your garden. So look at what you have now. Green onions regrowing in a glass from your own kitchen scraps. Loose leaf lettuce filling a window box in 3 weeks. Radishes you pull from a pot before you have had time to worry. And arugula that reseeds itself and comes back without your permission. 4 crops that genuinely feel like they water themselves, that survive impatience and inattention and the busy weeks, and that hand you food faster than you can talk yourself out of trying. This is what I meant. The crops changed, not you. But greens and roots are one thing. What about the plants you were supposed to keep alive for years, not weeks, the ones with a reputation for taking over or dying trying? Because the next handful on this list are the herbs and hardy roots that refuse to quit. The ones so tough that with mint your real problem is not keeping it alive, it is keeping it contained. Let me show you the plants that will outlive your worst gardening habits. Item number 7 is mint, and mint is where the whole tone of this list changes. Up to now we have been talking about plants that forgive you when you forget them. Mint does not just forgive you. Mint barely notices you are there. If the leafy greens are the friendly houseguest who tidy up after themselves, mint is the relative who moves in, takes over the spare room, and is somehow still thriving 3 years later when everyone else has moved on. And that is exactly what makes it perfect for a forgetful gardener who is nervous about killing things. You are not going to kill this one. That is not the risk with mint. The risk is the opposite. Let me explain why mint is so hard to kill, and I promise it is not complicated. Underneath the soil, mint sends out little horizontal stems called runners. Think of them like the way a strawberry sends a shoot sideways across the ground to start a whole new plant a foot away. Mint does that, but underground, and it does it all summer long. According to Bonnie Plants, those underground runners store their own energy and can push up brand new shoots from all along their length. So even if the top of the plant gets stepped on, or scorched or chewed down to nothing, there is a whole reserve system below the soil ready to send up fresh green leaves. That is why you can neglect mint for weeks, come back to a sad-looking pot, cut it right back and watch it return like nothing happened. Here is the honest part, and I want you to really hear this one. Because mint spreads through those underground runners, you must keep it in its own container. Not a shared pot with your other herbs. Its own pot, all by itself. The team at the University of California explained that if you put mint in the ground or in a mixed bed, Those runners will travel sideways and quietly colonize everything around them. And by the end of the season, you have mint where you wanted basil, mint where you wanted your lettuce, mint absolutely everywhere. But drop that same plant into its own 12-inch pot, and the walls of the container become the fence that holds it in. Suddenly, all that unstoppable energy has nowhere to go but up and out the top, into leaves for your tea and your cooking. The very thing that makes mint a nuisance in the ground makes it a gift in a container. So what does mint actually survive? It survives being forgotten on a hot patio. It survives you going away for a week in July. It survives the cool of early spring and the chill of late autumn, because the runners hold on through cold that would finish off a tender plant. Some gardeners report going a whole dry stretch without watering it and finding it still standing when everything else had given up. Now, I am not telling you to never water it. A pot on a sunny balcony will always appreciate a drink. But if your worry is I always forget, then mint is the plant that shrugs at forgetting. Give it a pot of its own, set it somewhere you will walk past, and it will hand you fresh leaves for years. And once you have felt that, once you have proven to yourself that you can keep something alive for years and not just weeks, the next herb is going to feel almost too easy. Because item number 8 is oregano, and oregano may be the one plant on this entire list that actually prefers to be ignored. I know how that sounds. We are so used to being told that plants need feeding and fussing and rich, dark soil. Oregano did not get that message. This is a Mediterranean herb, which means its ancestors grew wild on dry, rocky, sun-baked hillsides where the soil was thin and the rain was scarce. That is home for oregano. That is where it is happy. So when you take that plant, put it in a pot on your porch, and then forget to baby it, you are not neglecting it. You are giving it exactly the hard life it was built for. Here is the little kitchen truth that catches everyone out. Oregano grown in rich, damp, heavily fed soil tastes bland. All that comfort waters down the flavor. The same way a tomato grown in the shade and drowned in water comes out watery and pale instead of sweet and intense. The team at Gardener's Path point out that oregano is fairly tolerant of poor soils, strong wind, and hot, dry conditions, and that too much water is always worse for it than too little. So the gardener who forgets to water, the gardener who never bothers with fertilizer, the gardener who plants it in cheap, ordinary potting mix and walks away, that gardener is accidentally growing the best-tasting oregano on the street. Your worst habits are its ideal conditions. For a container, oregano asks for almost nothing, but there is one small thing that helps. It likes its roots to drain, so it does not sit in a soggy bottom. Epic Gardening recommends a breathable pot, something like a plain unglazed terracotta clay pot, because clay lets water pass through and dry out instead of trapping it. Picture the difference between a wet towel left crumpled in a bucket and a wet towel hung out in the breeze. The clay pot is the breeze. It lets the soil dry between waterings, which is precisely what a plant from a dry hillside wants. So what does oregano survive? It survives drought. It survives poor soil. It survives being the last thing you think about. And it rewards all of that with more flavor, not less. There is something quietly freeing about a plant that punishes fussing and blesses forgetting. And once you understand that, you start to relax about the whole thing. That relaxed feeling is the perfect frame of mind for item number 9, which is sorrel. Now, sorrel is one you may not know by name, and that is a shame, because it is one of the most rewarding low-effort plants a nervous beginner can grow. Sorrel is a leafy green with a bright, tangy, lemony taste, almost like someone squeezed a little lemon into the leaf itself. You tear a few young leaves into a salad or drop them into a soup and they wake the whole dish up. But the flavor is not even the best part for someone worried about keeping plants alive. The best part is that sorrel is a perennial, and I want to take a moment to explain what that word actually means for you. An annual plant lives one season and then it is done, and you start over from seed next year. A perennial does not do that. A perennial goes to sleep when the cold comes, holds on quietly through the winter down in its roots, and then comes back up on its own the following spring without you planting anything at all. Sorrel is that kind of plant. According to True Leaf Market, it is a cold, hardy perennial that can handle brutally cold winters and still return, and it is happy in either full sun or partial shade. So you plant it once. You let the winter take the leaves. And then one morning in spring, before you have even thought about gardening again, there it is, pushing up fresh green leaves like it never left. For someone who forgets, for someone who travels, For someone who is not sure they can keep a rhythm going, a plant that plants itself back every year is a genuine gift. And it is tough beyond just the cold. The folks at Growing with Nature describe sorrel as nearly indestructible and one of the most low-maintenance plants in the whole herb garden, resistant to pests and able to bounce back even after being chomped nearly to the ground. Read that again, because it matters to you specifically. Even eaten down to almost nothing, it grows back. That is the kind of resilience that means you cannot really lose. In a container, sorrel is undemanding, a decent-sized pot of ordinary potting mix in a spot that gets some sun, and it settles in and does its thing. It survives cold that would end most greens. It survives a nibble from a passing bug, and it survives the long stretch of winter when you are not thinking about it at all. And notice what all three of these plants have started to share. They store their strength somewhere safe and out of sight, and they draw on it when times get hard. Which brings us to the plant that takes that idea and turns it into a full underground pantry. Item number 10 is garlic, and garlic might be the most set-it-and-forget-it crop on this entire list, because the way you grow it is almost comically hands-off. You plant garlic in the fall. You plant it, you tuck it in, and then you essentially walk away for the winter and most of the spring, and you harvest it the following summer. According to the Old Farmer's Almanac, that stretch from planting to harvest runs somewhere around 240 days. So think about what that means for a forgetful gardener. The single most time-consuming vegetable, the one that takes the longest from start to finish, is also the one that asks the least of you day to day. You are not out there fussing over it every afternoon. You plant it once, and time does the rest of the work. Here is why that works, and it connects right back to what we have been seeing. When you plant garlic, you are not planting a seed. You are planting a clove, a single segment broken off a head of garlic, and that clove is basically a little packed lunch. It already contains its own stored food and water, everything the plant needs to get started, sealed up in that firm papery clove the same way a potato in your cupboard holds enough energy to sprout on its own in a dark drawer. That is the kitchen picture I want you to hold on to for all of these root crops. The plant does its own preparing. It packs its own supplies before it ever goes in the ground, so it is not depending on you to feed it in those early weeks when a fragile seedling would need constant attention. Garlic is beautifully suited to a container, and the requirements are gentle. Gardener's Path suggests a pot at least 8 inches deep with a mix that drains well, planting the cloves pointy end up in the fall. Savvy Gardening notes that in cooler climates you plant the cloves around the time of your first frost, and then the pot mostly looks after itself through the cold months. In early summer, some varieties send up a curly stalk called escape, and if you simply snap that off, the plant pours its energy back down into growing a fatter bulb. Then you wait until the lower leaves start to yellow and dry, and that is your signal that harvest time has come. What does garlic survive? It survives the entire winter sitting out in a pot. It survives months of you not touching it. It survives cold that would kill a tender annual, because that cold is not a threat to garlic. It is actually the trigger that tells the clove to wake up and split into a full head. The neglect is not a problem. For garlic, patience and neglect are practically the recipe. And I hope by now, standing here at item number 10, halfway through our 15, something has shifted for you. Look at what these 4 plants have in common. Mint stores its comeback in underground runners. Oregano stores its toughness in a heritage of surviving dry, thin hillsides. Sorrel stores its life in roots that sleep through winter and return on their own. Garlic stores an entire meal inside a single clove before it even goes in the soil. Every one of them prepares for hardship in advance, so that when the hardship comes, and when the forgetful gardener comes, they are already carrying what they need. You are not the thing keeping them alive. They came ready. That is why you cannot really kill them, and that is why the label plant killer was never fair to you in the first place. You were just trying to grow the fussy plants, the ones that demand daily attention, when this whole other world of self-reliant crops was waiting. So let that confidence settle in, because you have earned it. You now have a mint you cannot kill as long as you give it its own pot. You have an oregano that gets tastier the more you ignore it. You have a sorrel that replants itself every spring for years. And you have a garlic that grows a whole harvest while you get on with your life. That is 4 crops that ask almost nothing and give back for seasons, sitting on top of the greens and roots we covered before. Your container garden is filling out, and none of it has depended on you being perfect. But maybe there is still one plant living rent-free in the back of your mind, one crop that feels like the true test, the one you have tried before and lost, the one everybody says is difficult. The tomato. And I know exactly what you are thinking, that tomatoes are fussy, that they need staking and feeding and pruning and constant watching, that the big beautiful ones split and rot and break your heart. You are not wrong about those tomatoes. There is a whole branch of the tomato family that is nearly as forgiving as everything on this list so far, right alongside a bean that feeds itself and a root crop that actually loves being neglected in the heat. So if you have ever thought a real, ripe, homegrown tomato was simply beyond you, stay with me, because the next handful of crops is about to prove that even the fruiting plants you were most afraid of can survive a forgetful gardener. So let me introduce you to the tomato that changed everything for the nervous beginner. You have heard the horror stories about the big beefsteak types, the ones that need staking and pruning and constant attention, the ones that split or rot or refuse to ripen no matter what you do. Item 11 is not that plant. Item 11 is the cherry tomato, and it is the friendly, easygoing cousin who shows up to the family dinner without any drama at all. Let me tell you why the cherry tomato forgives you where the big ones punish you. A large tomato has to pour weeks of energy into a single heavy fruit, and if anything goes wrong during that long stretch dry soil one week, a cold snap the next, you lose the whole thing. A cherry tomato spreads its bet. It makes dozens and dozens of tiny fruits instead of a handful of giant ones, and it makes them fast, sometimes in as little as 65 days from a young plant. So if one cluster gets stressed and drops a few flowers, it barely matters because there are 10 more clusters coming right behind it. The plant is basically running many small kitchens at once instead of one enormous restaurant, and when you spread the work out like that, no single mistake can shut the whole operation down. There is also a whole family of compact cherry varieties that were bred specifically for people with no space and no experience. A variety called Tiny Tim, according to Victory Seeds, grows only about 10 to 12 inches tall and about 14 inches across, and it still bursts with a surprising number of little tomatoes for such a small plant. That is a tomato the size of a houseplant. It fits on a balcony rail on a sunny step on the corner of a small patio. You do not need a cage taller than you are. You do not need to learn pruning. You just need the plant, a pot, and a bit of patience. Now I promised you honesty on this whole list, and I am not going to break that promise here, because the cherry tomato does come with one real requirement, and it is the one thing you cannot fake your way around. A tomato is a sun plant. Everything green so far on this list, the kale, the chard, the lettuce, the herbs, will happily grow in part shade and forgive you for a dim corner. The tomato will not. According to the Old Farmer's Almanac, cherry tomatoes want at least 6 hours of direct sunlight a day, and 8 is better, and the plain truth is that the more sun they get, the more fruit they make and the sweeter that fruit tastes. Give a tomato a shady spot and it will survive, it just will not deliver. So the honest deal is this. If you have a bright windowsill, a sunny balcony rail, a patch of deck that bakes in the afternoon, you can grow a cherry tomato. If your only space is a north-facing corner that never sees the sun, be kind to yourself and grow the greens instead. Match the crop to the light you actually have, not the light you wish you had. The second half of that honest deal is the pot. The cherry tomato is forgiving about almost everything, but it wants room for its roots, and it wants water. This is the one crop on this list that a forgetful waterer does have to watch a little more closely, because a plant carrying dozens of fruits is thirsty, and a small pot dries out fast in the sun. So do yourself a favor and go bigger than you think you need. Even a compact variety is happiest in a container that holds a few gallons of soil, something at least 10 to 12 inches wide and deep. And the bigger the pot, the more soil you have holding water, and the more forgiving that plant becomes when life gets busy and you miss a day. Think of the pot as a reservoir. A tiny pot is a shot glass that empties in an hour. A deep, wide pot is a bucket that carries the plant through a hot afternoon and a distracted evening. Give the tomato its sun and its bucket, and it will hand you cherry tomatoes by the handful, warm off the vine, all summer long. That is not a fussy plant. That is a generous one that simply asks for 2 honest things in return. So that is your first fruit, and it turned out to be easier than the stories made it sound. The next one on the list does something so useful it almost feels like cheating, because item 12, the bush bean, does not just survive on neglect. It actually feeds itself. Let me explain that, because it sounds like a gardening fairy tale, and it is not. Beans belong to a family of plants called legumes, and legumes have a partnership with tiny helpers living in the soil around their roots. Those helpers are bacteria, and they do something no vegetable can do on its own. They pull nitrogen straight out of the air and hand it to the plant in a form the roots can use. Nitrogen is the nutrient that makes leaves green and growth strong, and it is the one most gardeners are forever buying in a bag and sprinkling on their pots. The bean skips the store. It grows its own supply through that partnership underground. So while every other plant is waiting on you to feed it, the bean has quietly set up its own little fertilizer factory in the soil and started running it. That is why the bush bean is one of the most rewarding crops a nervous beginner can grow. It is low maintenance because it takes care of a chunk of its own nutrition, and a modest pot on a balcony can still hand you a real harvest. The bush part matters too, and it is the reason I picked the bush bean over its taller cousin. Pole beans climb, and climbing means you need a trellis, netting, poles, something for them to grab. And that is one more thing to build and one more thing to fuss over. Bush beans stay short and tidy. They grow into a compact little clump about knee-high. They do not need anything to climb, and they hold themselves up. You plant them, they grow, they flower, they hand you beans, and they never once ask you for a structure to lean on. For someone who wants results without a construction project, that is exactly the plant you want. Every crop on this list has one honest catch, and here is the beans. That soil partnership I described, the one where bacteria feed nitrogen to the roots, only works if the right bacteria are actually present in the soil. In an old garden bed, those helpers build up over the years, and they are just there, waiting. But a fresh bag of potting mix from the store is basically sterile. It has no history, so it usually has none of those particular bacteria in it yet. Both Penn State Extension and University of Minnesota Extension recommend a simple fix for this. It is a product called a legume inoculant, a little powder you can buy at most garden centers for a few dollars, and you just dust it onto the seeds or the soil at planting time. That powder is nothing but a dose of the good bacteria, delivered up front so the partnership can start on day one. Think of it like the splash of starter you stir into fresh milk to make yogurt. The milk has everything it needs except the living culture, and one small spoonful of the right starter turns the whole batch. The inoculant is that spoonful. It is a couple of dollars, it takes 10 seconds, and it is completely optional. Your beans will still grow without it, they just grow better and feed themselves better with it. That is the entire catch. One cheap powder, sprinkled once, and then the plant handles the rest for the whole season. And if you skip the powder entirely, the beans still come. They will lean a little more on whatever compost is in your mix, and you might feed them lightly once or twice. But a bush bean is genuinely hard to fail with. It is fast, it is short, it holds itself up, and it does a big part of its own feeding. For a beginner who has been told that vegetables are needy and demanding, the bush bean is proof that some of them come pre-programmed to look after themselves. So we have a fruit that forgives you and a bean that feeds itself. The last crop in this section is the one that turns your worst gardening condition into its favorite one, because item 13, the sweet potato, actually loves the heat and the neglect that kills so many other plants. Think about the crops that struggle in high summer. The lettuce bolts, the spinach gives up, the greens wilt in the afternoon sun and beg for water twice a day. The sweet potato looks at all that and thrives, because it is a tropical vine at heart, and intense summer heat is the weather it was built for. According to the Old Farmer's Almanac, once a sweet potato is established, it is incredibly drought tolerant, and University of Maryland Extension describes it as a warm season crop that wants that long, hot stretch of summer to do its best work. So the very weeks that punish the rest of your container garden are the weeks the sweet potato is quietly having the time of its life. If you live somewhere hot, somewhere your other plants seem to sulk from June onward, this is the crop that finally rewards your climate instead of fighting it. The kitchen makes this easy to picture. A sweet potato spends the whole season doing one simple job. It is filling a pantry. All summer, those leafy vines are catching sunlight up top and shipping the energy down below, where the plant packs it away into fat, sweet roots hidden in the soil. That underground root is a storage cupboard, and a full cupboard does not panic when you forget to water for a day, because it is carrying its own reserves. The plant already banked what it needed. That is the deep reason so many of these unkillable crops shrug off a missed watering. They are not living hand to mouth like a thin little lettuce. They are living off a stocked pantry, and a stocked pantry buys forgiveness. Your container, sitting in the warm sun with that root growing fat inside it, becomes a kind of warm root cellar in reverse, a snug, heated cupboard where the plant quietly fills its shelves all season while you get on with your life. The sweet potato has one more trick that fits this list perfectly. You do not grow it from a seed packet at all. You grow it from something called a slip, and a slip is just a rooted sprout that you can start from a grocery store sweet potato sitting in your kitchen. Set part of a sweet potato in a little water on a warm, bright windowsill, and within a couple of weeks it starts pushing out green sprouts. Snap those sprouts off once they have a few leaves and some roots, and each one is a whole new plant ready to go into a pot. So this crop begins for free, from something you might already have in the cupboard, which is about as budget-friendly as gardening ever gets.